All right, so good afternoon. Let's get started. How is everyone doing? Good, good. So today I have a college-related meeting from 2:30. So I'm going to let Aaron handle. It's going to be Open Lab, and then you can work here, and Aaron will be available if there are any questions. And then he needs to close the room, so at 2:50 the class is over. And as you all know, it sounds like on Wednesday there is no college classes for anyone. It's a professional development day for faculty, so no classes. So today is the only day we have together this week. And so we are going to do a couple more things with forms, and then there is a short chapter that actually is going to fit just well since we have short time. And that's the chapter on extra markup, which will allow us to essentially summarize together those different ID and class attributes that we have been speaking about here and there, but now they'll be presented in one place for you together. So let me turn this projector on. And I graded the homework. It seems like pretty much everyone did the tables fine. So those are working. That's good. And now you'll be working on your form control. So the one thing we need to cover today is how to validate input with the required field. We'll start there. Okay. So this is what form validation looks like. So again, when we say form validation, what do we mean by this term? I talked about it last time. Who remembers? Then? This is one form. Making it required is definitely one form of form validation. You can also make it so that there are specific formats that the user has to enter, such as a credit card or zip code, or which one do you? Email, exactly, yeah. So there are different levels, but one of the most straightforward is that is this field required? So they can't just bypass, they have to enter something. And normally for more advanced form validation, we're going to be using JavaScript because it requires a scripting language. But HTML5 provides a very easy to use and very simple form validation, which is in the form of an attribute. So if you have a field that you want to make sure the user enters something, all you have to do is add the required attribute and set it to required. This will make it so the user will be required to enter something in the username field. It's not going to be that they're going to check the type of text that they enter, if it's valid, if it's actually a name versus numbers, for example, but it will make it so that the user is required to enter something. So they're required to have a username, password, and the form will not be submitted until those fields are entered by the user. So that's one example of form validation. And this is the extent to which you will be concerned with form validation as far as your homework and really for the rest of Web 110. In Web 150, whoever is taking it, we're going to spend a lot more time showing how to validate data in different ways as well. And so this is a browser rendered, so in other words, you can change it. Browser rendered warning here that says you have to fill out the field. So it's not customizable. Again, it's going to be rendered by the browser. All right. And then once you enter, you should be able to submit the form. Okay, so let's go ahead and work through this example, hands-on. Oh, and before I forget, so last time, those of you who are not here, we couldn't get the recording together. The program would crash over and over, so it just didn't work, but it looks like today we are back recording. So make sure to look over the form pages that we covered pretty much from where you were last time until this one here. All right, so this is going to be form validation with HTML5, and let's start our Visual Studio, hopefully. If this works. If it doesn't work, I'm just going to use brackets at this point. It didn't start, and I don't want to deal with it right now, so I'll just go the simple way. Okay, I'm sorry, Aaron. I'll just use brackets. Okay, so let's save as form-validation.html. And this is brackets, but you can use your Visual Studio Code. I'm using it on my laptop. And then recreate your import a template or recreate one real quick if you're a quick typist. So this is form validation. So more specifically, this functionality is only available in HTML5. So let's add here HTML5 form validation. And then we have a form attribute. And the action attribute, sorry, a form tag, and then the action attribute is going to specify the name. What is the action attribute? I should ask you at this point. Who remembers? Brandon? That is going to? All right, the name of the page that is going to process the form. And we need to create one if you don't have one already. And we're going to call it success.html. So we can see if the form submitted successfully. And as I said multiple times, this is normally a PHP page, but we just don't deal with PHP yet. So we're using a mock HTML form. And then I'm going to have a method equals, and we have the option of get or post. By default, it's going to, if you don't specify anything, it's going to be get. We're going to be working with the username and password, so let's make it post. And then if we made it post, what does this mean to the form submission, Anna? Right, the fields will not be displayed on the URL. They will be submitted more securely. All right, and so let's create our, and then this will be an opportunity to also review the label. So for label 4, and I'll name this username. And now we need to associate this label with a form control. So this is going to be input type text. And then we need to state that the ID is, at this point, the ID has to equal to username, because that's what the label is going to look for. So we're going to give it an ID of username, and that's how the label will know to be associated with this particular form control. All right, remember this from last time? Okay, we're going to try it without the required field and then width. So for now, just we'll submit as is, and then we're going to add a break. And then we have a second label for password. And then we have input type equals to password. And the ID needs to match the label. So this will be password. The word password is not of significance here as long as you match those two words, right? As long as the ID matches the label for attribute, you can name it anything you want, right? You can name it password1, as long as that's also password1, it will work. There is a HTML5 email attribute, so it can be specifically with a specific email format. We need to still do this example. Last time we just did a date, so we have a couple more to do today. That's right. Okay, and then we're going to close the input field. Then the last one is going to be input type equals submit. And value equals submit. Since this is a bit of a review as well, let's go ahead and group. Do you remember there is an element you can use to group the form elements together to sort of frame them? And do you remember? Field set. Okay. So we can, inside the form element, we're going to add a field set to contain all the controls inside the form. And this will give us a more, essentially a border around our form elements. Probably add a break here as well. Right, and we need to create a success HTML form to display if you don't have one in the folder already. Success.html. Oh, it's already, it looks like I have it already. So if you don't, then you need to create it. Save. All right, let's test this if you're ready. Do you have any questions so far? So here is our form. All right, so it's submitted. And then the other test to do would be that if we left one or both of these fields blank, it still submits, because at this point we're not requiring any validation. And so if we wanted to require the user to enter username and password with HTML5 attributes, the only thing we need to do is add one additional attribute which is required. So we're going to say required equals required. And I'm going to do the same with the password field. And this is a very easy and convenient way to get some basic validation if you have some fields in your form that are required. And again, this is an example of an attribute. And inside the attribute, we have a key value pair, key type, value password, key ID, value password, required, key, value, required. All right, let's test it again. Okay, so now we get the HTML5 browser error message. Again, it doesn't care what you have here as long as you have something. So just to be clear. And now it's not complaining about username, but if we leave the password blank, then it's going to complain. When you fill out both required fields, then your form will submit. In terms of the code or in terms of the look? Okay, let's see. Is you just have an H1 or some kind of a block level element there to say thanks for your submission. So it's not really doing anything. Are you good, Jason? Jason? Josh, sorry. All right. All right, any other questions? All right, so something else you can do is you can add a placeholder, such as first name, last name, or we can do something. So placeholder is the name of the attribute. And then we can set it to, I guess, JDO, so just showing the format first and last. And then let's see what this looks like. Here is the placeholder. And then you should be able to override it when you click and start typing, then you can put in your own and submit. There we go. Yeah, you may say anything that you think it's appropriate. This is going to go into the success.html. So right here, there's the second page. That's where this goes. Yeah, you can make up your own, or you can add an image here, or a GIF, or anything you want. Yes, you do. That's right. You need to have a page that's going to display when you submit your form. Yeah. Let's do a couple more things with forms. If you're ready for a little more. So we have username, password, and then let's go ahead and add let's work with a couple more HTML5 form controls, more specifically the email and the URL. So again, let's create a label for email. And then we're going to have an input of type email as opposed to text. And then we need to give it an ID so we can associate with the label. And we can make it required. So if we want to make it required, here we go. Let's take a look. So we have the email. And let's enter something here. These are required. And then the email, we made it required, so I'm going to enter SM. And now, as you can see, it's required, but it's also required to have a specific format. So this is the new addition here. And it's going to want you to include at, dot, and then essentially it wants it to have an email format. So it would be, for example, sm@gmail.com, and that should be accepted. And it worked. All right. So it's a specific format that it's looking for in terms of the email address. And then next we're going to do the same, excuse me, with the URL. If you're entering URL, it's going to want a specific URL format to be entered. Here is the code if you need it again. You might have noticed that the label fields are a little, essentially depend on the length of the word. And there is some boilerplate CSS I'll share with you soon so you can style this. So don't worry about it right now. Or if it bothers you, you can use the paragraph, but it's something we're going to address with CSS. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's add a website and we can make it optional. They don't have to enter the website. So label for website. Website. Add a break here as well to give ourselves a line. And actually add a break here as well. Excuse me. Question.
What advantages do the labels have?
Yeah.
Why can't they just be like
They can. So again, the point here being that you want to use as many of the semantic markup of HTML as possible, because then if you're having a screen reader, for example, it's going to be able to discern more clearly what exactly is going on because it has more metadata about the page. If you have someone who is visually impaired, they're going to use a screen reader, and then they're going to see this is a label as opposed to just a paragraph, and it's just not, essentially it carries more information about what's going on as opposed to paragraph. Does this make sense? It's more specific. But yeah, you can use a paragraph as well. The general direction is to use the more meaningful, more semantic rich elements that are available, and they keep on adding them for this reason to the HTML5. All right. And so website, let's create another input, type equals URL. We need to give it an ID of a website. And we didn't make this one mandatory. We can. So let's leave it optional just to have a different case here. Okay, so let's look at our website. All right, here's the website. So these are mandatory. We need to add required. This one is optional. So if we don't enter anything, it's going to be, it will submit. So take a look here, as you can see. But if we enter something that is just like 1, 2, 3, 4, honey, it's going to now say, well, it's not really a URL format. I need you to give me the proper format. And the format is HTTP, let's see. I don't know if it has I think it has www actually. I have to look this up. It's been a while. www. I think it's HTTP www.sm.com, for example. So it's looking for these markers on the page. Yeah, so that worked. Okay. Let's see if I'm pretty sure it wants, right. Yeah. Let's see here. So it wants to have the protocol, http://www. Let's see if it requires the www. No, it doesn't. Okay. So it needs to have HTTP and then dot and then some extension. It doesn't have to be com. It can be club, and this should also work. There we go. Okay. Here's the code. And again, if your browser is older and it doesn't support these controls, it's going to display as plain text. So you on Safari, I might see plain text. I'm not sure. Or even if it's a different browser, if it's an older version. Let's add one last control, and then we're going to move on to a different topic. There is also a control that allows you to create this kind of a search field. So let's put it, I guess we can put it down here. Same thing. If you're comfortable, you can even copy and reuse the code here. Just make changes to the values. So this is going to be a search control. Search. The input type would be search. So would be the ID. And again, it doesn't have to be, it just has to match the 4 attribute here. Okay, so the search field, it has to have something to search against. So right now it's not really functional, but it's a search field. And when, again, that's something that in the Java class, sorry, the JavaScript class, we're going to essentially create an array of values that you can search against. So it requires a scripting language to actually have a functioning search box, but this is the front end to it. So I think we covered everything about forms that you need to know at this point. Right. And we're going to come back to forms with CSS to style forms. Let's see here. All right, so let's just review the summary of what we covered with forms. All right, so any kind of information collection that you have planned for your page, you're going to put it in a form element. You can have multiple forms on a page, although usually you'd have one, but you can have more than one. The form element contains the elements that belong inside your form, so you can have 2 or 3, if you will. And we learned that we have different attributes inside the form to be used for different purposes. The name value pair, we actually haven't had to use. Do you remember what this is about, though? I told you. Does anyone remember? There was a name attribute equals to a value. So the name, no one remembers? Okay. The name attribute is used if you're going to submit a form to a PHP processing site, the server, and then it contains the information that you actually collected from the form. So if you have a username, and then the name value pair would be name equals Anna, for example. So that's the information that gets carried to the server. So one thing at least to remember is that the name attribute is used when you're interacting on the server side, because everything we're doing here is on the client side so far. It's only front end. So name value pair, but also in addition to the name attribute, I call them key value pair, but sometimes they'll be referred to as name value pair. We have noticed that all these attributes, they go together as, I prefer actually key, as a key value pair, like ID name, required, and so on. So key value pair is an important concept to be very comfortable with because you see it over and over, right? A lot of data gets stored in these big files called JSON files, JSON, and they are stored in key value pair. You see this concept over and over in a lot of things you do. Okay. And we learned some new HTML5 elements that allow you to specify more, in a more granular level, what kind of data you're getting from the user, such as a URL or a date. And we also learned about the required attribute that allows you to validate your form, and you need to use it on your homework assignment. And you need to have a success page to display when your form submits. Okay? I think that's all. Any questions or comments about forms? If it's on a different page, you should, the form would probably, if it's long, just be scrolling down, and it shouldn't be this long in terms of usability. That sounds like it would be a bad user experience. So you want to avoid too big of a form like that. But it would have to be on the same page to work. Right. Anything else? No? All right. So that's forms, chapter 7. All right, so now moving on to chapter 8. Extra markup. So again, this will be chapter to essentially put together these miscellaneous HTML elements and attributes we've been working with, but just to have it under the same umbrella of a chapter. And we're going to start afar by looking at different forms of HTML. So these slides are old. Actually, where HTML5 is now, well, it is work in progress, but it's now the standard. So you need to be using HTML5, right? It's no longer an option. But it went through different iterations throughout its existence, and currently we are on HTML5 and CSS3. Those are the latest versions. There is a consortium that continues to work through the web standards to standardize the different HTML and CSS versions. And so you can look at their work, but it's called the W3C. And so this is the official documentation where you can read about what is currently going on. And the funny thing is that it's just a lot of text, so maybe they did it on purpose, but it's pretty much very much text, so you have to do a lot of reading if you're actually interested in following the details here. It can be an interesting reading, I suppose. You should know about the W3C consortium, though. That's part of your education as a web developer, if you will. And also, here is an example. We are familiar with the doc type HTML, the HTML5, which is what we have used. Sometimes if you're looking at some older pages, you may see a declaration looking different. And these are the HTML4 and XHTML versions of web pages. So those are some older pages might have this markup because they're not yet HTML5. Sometimes pages are legacy and there is no real maybe resources or time to convert them. So you still might see some older pages. And if you see at the top one of these two declarations, it's going to mean that it's an older version and therefore doesn't support HTML5 markups. Angie? So it happened, I was actually in class when it got announced maybe a year ago or so. But we were literally in class and then this news came up. Now HTML5 is the standard. Because we used to say it's not the standard yet, but you should be moving towards using it. There is always new work coming up. So yeah, pretty much you can take for granted that some new changes, but I haven't heard anything of HTML6 becoming prominent. It's still very much HTML5. We can look up the exact date. I think it was somewhere like a year ago, but we did have it was in the fall, so we had a Web 110 class when the announcement was made. So, yeah. All right. And then I mentioned to you about XML. You should be familiar with this as well. XML is a different markup language than HTML, and you probably encountered it at some point. It's mostly used to store data in key value pairs. And what is unique about HTML is that you can make up your own tags. So I think I told you this as well. HTML tags are only, you can pick from a list, but you can't make up your own. But with XML, you can make up your own tags as well. So if you're working on a website that has some kind of concert events, then you can store your data about the event in a key value pair in XML, such as event location, Seattle, event date, XYZ, and so on. So this is what XML is about. So here's a slide on something you hopefully are familiar with, which is how to add comments in HTML. So this would be a comment. And then note that sometimes this becomes a point of confusion. CSS comments are different, so I'll show you when the time comes. And JavaScript comments are different. Sometimes we need to work with all three together, and the comments are different. If you're on HTML, if you're on a page with .html extension, this is the type of comment you should be using. If you're on a page with .css extension or .js extension, you need to use different kind of comments, and I'll show you what they are when the time comes. So these are specifically for HTML pages. And here is the ID attribute. We've been using it for a variety of purposes. And so again, if you have, in this case here, you have multiple paragraphs on the page and you want to style only one of them in a certain way or address only one of them in a certain way, then you're going to give it an ID, and that's what ID is used for, to uniquely identify an element on a page. You can only have one per page, all right? Is everyone comfortable with ID at this point? Any questions? All right, it's case sensitive, so if you put a capital P here, it will be a problem if you're referring to it as lowercase, and it's one of these things that the validator will not catch for you. So if your page is validating and then you're still getting some kind of strange errors, one thing to check is to make sure your attribute names match, okay? And again, that's an example of a key value pair. ID attributes. So in the example here, the styling is such that only the paragraph with ID has a special font, all caps, as opposed to the other two paragraphs on the page. This is the outcome. And just to clarify, it means that there was some CSS. It's not just you give it ID, but there is a CSS associated with ID that made this possible. And then the class attribute, we haven't really had a need yet to use it, but this is what it looks like. So it's a class, and then you give it a name, or sometimes you might have multiple classes associated with the same element, so you'd have space between them if that's the case. And so what do we have here? We have, how do you read what's going on here with this, on this page? Can someone interpret for us, Arthur?
So class first item on the file sheet, that element inherits all the stylings from the class on this.
That's right. And we have a class important, so both paragraphs are going to inherit the important styles. But also the second class also has an additional, so we would expect to see an additional CSS style that just applies to this, which is for admittance. So this one actually has two styles going on, whereas the upper one only one. And you can, sometimes people just use a class instead of an ID, and that works. But generally the idea of a class is to use it if you have more than one. But you can use just for one, and that should still work the same, right? And so if you have two classes, you just leave a space and you can list them, or more. You can list them inside the quotation mark. All right, so as you can see here, the first and the last class were marked as important, so they're both capital, but only the last one had admittance style. Only the last one is red, because only this one had the appropriate style associated with it. Okay, and then we talked about block level elements. Who remembers what is a block level element? Show you some W3C tutorials about it. Cheyenne? Of the line. Exactly. So that's the definition of block level element. So these here, all the headings, the paragraphs, they will be block level elements. UL, LI, as you know, they will take up their own line, so they're all block level elements. Okay. So those boxes around them that you see, there is always an invisible box behind any element on the page, okay? And you can actually make it visible by using CSS, but this is the idea here. This is your element. This is the content here for the H1, but even so, it's blocked, so it's going, the next, as you said, the next element is going to start on the next page, right? And this is the CSS box, and we're going to talk a lot about the box model, and it's very useful to think in terms of styling your pages. And then inline elements, we have seen a few of those. Here are some examples here. The M element, And again, if we display, or the bold element, if we display if you look at the text, going the wrong direction here. Here's their box model. They are not going to push the next content to the next line. They're going to be inline, all right? And another important inline element is the span, S-P-A-A, span, rather, not span, S-P-A-N. And as I mentioned, when you're doing form validation, you often use a span to write your own, this text is required, or some kind of validation text, because it goes on the same line as the form. So these are inline. And then the div element is used essentially to group together elements. And then the advantage of doing so would be that you can give the div an ID and then apply some kind of style to the entire, to all these elements inside, all right? And so the div, you can think of it as a container for other elements. It's like a box inside of which you have other elements. As you can see here, you can have anything really, images and so on. And so this would become the header of your page. Is going to have a logo and then some links. And then you can apply, let's say, a background color or a special font size to the entire heading of your document. And again, when we talk about web page, we call them pages. You can also hear it commonly called, referred to as the document, okay? So this is the div. Really? Is the slide not shared? I mean, it should be. Are you not seeing this? You are. Okay. So this is the div. This is the div, and so the image is going to be inside the div as well as the links, right? So here is an example of the span. And that's exactly how you'd use it. You're going to give it, for example, a class gallery. And so what is going to be affected by this span? Brandon? Just the Tate modern. That's what we expect to see. Going the wrong way again. Okay, and as you can see, indeed, the Tate modern is the only one that gets affected. So that's how you use the span. Inline, another element. Iframes, generally, we don't really use them, so I would not recommend using them yourself, but there are a lot of snippets of code that you can grab from the web, such as the Google Maps, that actually live inside an iframe. And so I'll show you. Essentially, you just copy and paste what you get from Google on your page, and then there you have a map or some other addition to your page. So this is what an iframe is. And then this is how Google implements their maps. So you can get a map through Google, and we can do this example. And then there is something else. Remember me telling you that what is inside the head of a page or a document is not really meant for the user to see. So this is where the metadata is going to go. And these are things that are important for the page, but not for the user to see, such as the name is the description. You have some content here, which will be used by search engines potentially to essentially see what your page is about. Then it's going to have some other meta attributes such as robots, content, no follow. This has to do with if you, as you know, there are a lot of bots that are essentially using the web for their own purposes. So you're telling here, if you're a bot page, do not follow this link. So you're trying to essentially prevent bots from using your page for their own purposes. And again, none of these are visible for the user. This is all stuff that happens behind the scene. So metadata means metadata would be data about the data. So there's the idea with meta. You're probably familiar with this term. You're going meta on me, right? Um, and so something else here would be do not cache the content of this page. All this goes in the head, and again, it's not visible by the user, but it will be used for search engines, for screen readers, and to give additional information about the page. Search engines is a topic that should probably have its own two-credit class at this point, but Google has a lot of rules about what is okay. So a lot of people started sort of gaming the system with search engines. They would create blogs and link to other people, and there was a whole system of how to essentially get your page up. And then, Brandon, which one? When people, so for example, if you and I say you click on you link to my blog, and I'm going to link back to yours. I think so, maybe, I'm not sure. But it was a technique used to essentially make your page look like it's very popular. So what you should know is that Google pretty much cracked down on all this, so you shouldn't try to game the system in this way. But one thing that Google is now is going to essentially give you high points for is if your page is mobile friendly. They will rank you higher if your page is mobile friendly, and there is a page that you can go and check if your page is mobile friendly on Google. So they give you this link. Now I don't know, it's not really the time. We haven't talked about, when we talk about responsive pages, then we're going to go and check on Google to make sure that our pages are mobile friendly. So this is your metadata here on the head element. And then you might have seen, so here's what this would look like, the copy symbol. So sometimes maybe you wondered, how do I make a copy symbol? Or if you want to write HTML on your page, that's a bit of a problem because it's already used up by the language. So the solution to this is something called escape characters. And this is what they look like. So there is a list of many different escape characters. But for example, the one to use a copy symbol is going to be @copy, semicolon, all right? And then there's a couple different ways you can do this. And the same goes true for the HTML tag. You can write an HTML in two different ways, with a LT, GT, or with the numbers, the hexadecimal values. So those are escape characters. Let's see. Okay, we're going to do some examples in the next few minutes, but let's just do a summary here of what we covered. So now you know about doc types for different versions of HTML. You know how to add comments in HTML. You know the purpose of ID and class attributes. You learned about the div. It's a very, very useful. These are both very useful div and span elements. Div is if you want to group your elements at a block level, and span is to select inline certain part of your element. And then iframes, essentially don't use them other than just copy and paste, such as a Google iframe that you can post in your page. They used to be more popular in the past. Meta tags will give you data about the data on your page, or information, if you will. And some special characters that you don't have on your keyboard, you can also include them, like you know, playing card symbols and things like that, through the escape characters. Okay. So let's take a short break because we don't have a lot of time before I have to leave, but do take a break, and then we'll see if we can get through a couple examples as well. Maybe we can start looking at the escape characters. I'll see you in about 5, well, Okay, so let's take a look at the tutorial for HTML entities. This is the second link I posted. It's the HTML escape characters tutorial on the week 6 module. So let's launch it. And so these are the two cases where you might be using, you need to use HTML escape characters, or AKA HTML entities. One is that if you're using reserved characters, such as if you're trying to write HTML tags on the page, they're already reserved by the language, so you need to use an escape character. Or if you're trying to print, let's say, again, like a card, spade of vases or something like that, and then it's not available on the keyboard, you can still add it to your page by using an escape sequence. These are two cases where you'd use them. And there are two different formats. It can be, just as we saw with the copy case, it can be the name of the entity with an ampersand or the hashtag entity number, so the hexadecimal number of the entity. And there is always a possibility that some browsers may not support the entity that you're displaying, but that's, just be aware of it. So here's a list of some, and you can also just Google HTML escape characters reference for even a more complete list. W3 schools, are you raising your hand? The map? With the Google Maps? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, here's what I'll do. I'm going to put it, that's what I was actually, yeah, I can print it. It's not going to be. This is 3174. Okay. Okay, it should be printing now. I'm also going to put it under Google on week 6 because we sort of combined several exercises. So I'm putting it on the week 6 module as well if you want to reference it. Okay. And I think we're out. That's my timer. All right. All right, time to go. So what I would recommend is to go over the HTML escape characters tutorial on W3 Schools. And then Open Lab after that. And we can talk about the escape characters if you have any questions next time. And here's a link. This code is all there, but I'm putting it here since it's combining a couple exercises. Here we go. Okay. That's all we have time for. Do you have any last questions before I leave? All right. Thanks, and I'll see you next week. It's going to be a short week, I guess.